We have a legal system in this country that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent.
Bryan Stevenson, groundbreaking civil rights attorney, founded the Equal Justice Initiative to defend those no one else would.
To always do the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing.
Winning landmark Supreme Court cases and freeing over 140 wrongly condemned prisoners.
The day that I shook this man's hand, I knew God had sent me his number one lawyer.
Anthony Ray Hinton survived 28 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. 2 men, a bond forged by injustice, and a mission to tell the truth we all need to hear.
We say in our world that capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment.
They had the only evidence they needed, and that is that I was black.
Choosing hope over hate became their greatest act of resistance.
Most people wouldn't be able to endure that. It's just easier to give up. And what makes him so remarkable is that he found his hope.
Michael B. Jordan and O'Shea Jackson Jr. brought their story to the big screen in Just Mercy. And now hosts Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, Marc Kielburger, and Craig Kielburger dive deeper. A transformative conversation about resilience, redemption, and how in the darkest moments we can choose hope over hate.
We don't talk about slavery and lynching and segregation because we want to punish America. We talk about these things because we want to liberate America. It's those uncomfortable truths that inspire us.
Welcome to My Legacy. Today our guest is the extraordinary Bryan Stevenson, a man who has dedicated his life to defending the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. His work has fundamentally reframed what justice can and should look like in America. Bryan, we are truly honored that you are here with us today. And as our audience knows, our guests always bring a +1 to the conversation, someone who has impacted their life in a profound way. You've brought someone whose story is at the heart of why you do this work. Will you please do us the honor of introducing your +1?
Yes, I am thrilled to be sitting next to my client, my friend, my brother, my colleague, Anthony Ray Hinton, who was born and raised in Alabama, northwest of Birmingham, raised by an amazing, loving mother who taught him really powerful truths about what's right and what's wrong. A talented baseball player, was working in the coal mines, and then was wrongly accused of committing 2 murders because he was poor and didn't have the resources to get the kind of legal help he needed because he is Black and was presumed dangerous and guilty. He was wrongly convicted and sentenced to death and spent nearly 30 years on Alabama's death row. I had the great privilege of representing him for the last 16 years, and I'm so thrilled that in April of 2015, he walked out of prison here and not just walked out and regained his freedom, but began a project, a movement, a mission to tell people around this country about the harms of the death penalty, the wrongfulness of inequality and injustice. And he's now a beloved community educator here at the Equal Justice Initiative. So this is Anthony Ray Hinton.
To understand this incredible bond that the two of you share today, let's go back to when you first met. Anthony, you have been on death row for over a decade. Wow. And one day, while you're being walked back to your cell, you see Bryan on television talking about Walter McMillan, a man that he just freed from death row. What did you write to Bryan in that first letter that you sent him?
Mr. Stevenson, I know you get a lot of letters from inmates. I said, but I am truly innocent, and I would like to ask a favor of you. And that favor was, would you read my transcript? And after reading my transcript, would you consider being my lawyer? And I figured, hearing so much about him, as small as he was, as great as he was, once he read my transcript, there would be no doubt that he would say something is wrong with this case. I felt within my heart, this is the right person after listening to him on TV talk about why we don't need a death penalty in this country. And I figured my case was perhaps one of the best cases he would ever come across, due to the fact there was no evidence, there was no eyewitness, no fingerprints, It was based on racism, if you ask me, and the fact that I was born black and poor. And I think about 3 months later, he had told me he was coming to see me. And the day, I say this with all honesty, the day that I shook this man's hand, I knew God had sent me his #1 lawyer.
Wow. And at that point, you had been on death row for over a decade.
Yes. And he said, I'm going to get you out of here. And I hadn't heard that from any lawyer that I had previous to Mr. Stevenson becoming my lawyer. And when he said those words, he said, don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here. I believed him. I had no reason to doubt him. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I really felt that this was the man that God had brought in my life to represent me, to get me to where I am today. And I was right.
Wow. You were.
Yes.
Bryan gave a little bit of context. Anthony was charged with 2 murders in 1985. He was convicted and sent to death row, even though he had a solid alibi. The only evidence linking him to the crime was a gun that the state claimed matched the bullets. But Bryan, of course, would later prove that it didn't. But then the more substantive question is that you said that race, poverty, and inadequate legal assistance conspired to create a textbook example of injustice in Anthony's case. What do most people not understand about those 3 intersections of race, poverty, and inadequate legal assistance, and how, unfortunately, those often conspire to work together?
Well, I often say that we have a legal system in this country that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes the outcomes of many criminal trials. And Mr. Hinton's case dramatically revealed that the state had virtually no credible basis for believing that he committed these crimes. They retrieved a gun from his mother's home that clearly had not been fired in many, many years. They tested it. There was no legitimate match between the bullets and this gun from the crime scene, but they were so desperate to solve these crimes. Just to create some context, these murders, a couple of fast food store managers had created a lot of fear and alarm in the Birmingham area. So people were on edge. There was pressure on them to make an arrest. People wanted to believe that some dangerous person was no longer out there. And that pressure meant that I don't think they were as focused on getting the right person, the person who'd actually committed the crime, than getting somebody that would allow them to say to the public, we've solved the crime. And because Mr. Hinton was indigent, didn't have the money, they knew he was going to have to rely on whatever lawyer the court appointed to him. And to be honest, if he had had the resources to get the kind of legal help he needed, he would have never been convicted. And it's still tragic to this day that he didn't have that. Because he's sitting here next to me now, and he's got an amazing sense of humor. He's got a powerful mission and testimony, and he's a powerful speaker. But he lost 28 years of his life. He lost so much that no one can give him back. And that's a tragedy that we cannot fix. And so having an indigent defense system, having a legal system that doesn't disadvantage you, doesn't disfavor you, even when you're innocent, is a critical issue in America. And we've done very little to create the kind of resources that many people in this country need when they're accused of a crime. So that's how poverty plays out. He needed an expert who could make it very clear that the weapon that they were trying to connect was not the weapon involved. He couldn't get that. He got an expert who was literally blind in one eye, who was a mechanical engineer, who had never testified in this kind of case. And the jury literally laughed at that witness when he was on the stand. Race comes into play because I do think there's a presumption of dangerousness and guilt that gets assigned to Black and brown people in this country. Where when the jury comes in, they presume you're guilty, they presume you're dangerous, and the burden is on you to prove the opposite. Now, our legal system is actually based on a presumption of innocence. It's not Mr. Hinton's burden to prove anything when he gets to court. He should have been able to sit there and be exonerated because the state couldn't credibly prove his guilt. But because he's Black and there's this presumption of dangerousness and guilt, it was his burden to prove to the jury that he didn't commit this crime. And of course, that's a whole different kind of task than the lawyer that was appointed to represent him was prepared to take on. And so that combination of race and poverty really created an environment where he could be wrongly convicted. And it's a huge problem. We've now identified over 200 people who've been exonerated after being sentenced to death. We have an error rate in this country that's shocking. For every 8 people we've executed in the United States, we've identified one innocent person on death row who's been exonerated and released.
Wow. Wow.
And the truth is, we would never tolerate that rate of error in any other area. If somebody said 1 out of 8 planes is going to crash on takeoff and everybody's going to die, nobody would fly. If somebody said, oh, 1 out of 8 apples has a toxin on it, and if you touch that apple, you're going to die, we would stop selling apples. But we continue to tolerate a death penalty with this sort of error rate. And the victims are people like Mr. Hinton. You know, if I get in trouble and someone represents me and my life is imperiled, I want that lawyer to represent me as if their life was imperiled. I want them to fight for me like they're fighting for themselves. And that's the kind of lawyer I want to be. And that's the kind of lawyer that Mr. Hinton needed, but didn't get. And because he didn't get that, it cost him nearly 30 years. And I do hope people understand that this isn't just some rare incident. His case dramatized these problems in a very powerful way. We say in our world that capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment. I think when people talk about the death penalty, the threshold question isn't whether people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed. The threshold question is, do we deserve to kill? If we have a legal system that is so undermined by bias against the poor, bias against people of color, that's so flawed by errors. And in my judgment, we do not have that kind of system. We do not deserve to kill when there are people like Anthony Ray Hinton experiencing what he's experienced in this country over the time he was on death row.
Wow, that was just so incredibly powerful to understand the 1 in 8.
When I was arrested, the officer told me there was 5 things that was going to convict me. And he said, number 1, you black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot her. Number 3, you're going to have a white judge. Number 4, you're going to have a white prosecutor. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. Nowhere in there did he ever say, we have evidence, we have fingerprints, we have an eyewitness, we got you on camera, or we got someone that gave us a description. And even to this day, that still haunts me, because this detective knew they didn't need no evidence. They had the only evidence they need, and that is that I was black.
We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars on jails and prisons in the 1980s and 1990s. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on more law enforcement resources. We didn't spend a penny on indigent defense in most of these jurisdictions. We didn't have that same kind of increase in spending. And we could do that. I think, for us, and Mr. Hinton is now involved in this work, if we made the kind of investments into dealing with the health needs of a lot of people who are struggling, I think we could actually dramatically reduce the problems of crime. We could improve public safety. We could eliminate some of these horrible crimes. Most of our policymakers, and you know this, they go around saying, after you've been raped, after you've been robbed, after you've been murdered, we're going to really beat up on the person who committed that crime. That's not an effective strategy. We should be saying, what are we going to do to prevent these kinds of crimes? And that means we have to invest in health. We have to invest in making sure people have the basic needs. And I'll use the drug policy, just one small example, and I'll stop. You'll remember in the 1970s and 80s, we had politicians from both political parties who were saying that people who are drug addicted and people who are drug dependent are criminals who should be punished. And that's when our prison population went from 300,000 in the early 70s to over 2 million by the end of the century. We became the nation with the highest rate of incarceration in the world. Now, we should have said that people who are suffering from drug addiction and drug dependency had a health problem, and we need a healthcare response to that problem. And if we had invested in healthcare solutions to addiction and dependency, we wouldn't have had all of these millions of people going to jails and prison. We could have kept families together. We could have reduced all of that collateral crime. We wouldn't need to be hunting drug traffickers in the Caribbean and talking about the scourge and the threat of that problem, because we would have been dealing with this problem as a health problem and be in a very different place. Instead, we have these record levels of opioid addiction and drug overdose. And that's where I feel like we do have the capacity. The question is, do we have the will? And I think if we can match the will with our capacity, we can completely change our legal system. I don't think there's anything that we should be bragging about or even honorable about having the highest rate of incarceration in the world. That's a statistic that marks failure. When you have to imprison so many people, then you are failing to use your resources in a way that built a healthy and just society. And we just have to connect the will with the capacity. And I think if we do that, we can make transformational changes in our society.
Mr. Hinton, let me ask a question. You were 29 years old when you were sent to death row.
Yes, sir.
And it was over a dozen years before you met Bryan. How did you survive during that time?
To be honest with you, I survived by faith, and I came to understand there was nothing I could do. I had to somehow find a way to escape. And I used my mind to believe that I wasn't in at 5 by 7. Every morning I had the ability to leave and go wherever I wanted to go and do whatever I wanted to do. And then without having that ability to do that, having Mr. Stevenson wouldn't have done me no good, because I was in solitary confinement, and solitary confinement is meant to break you. And so I refused to be broke. I hadn't committed a crime, and I just knew at some point in some time, I truly felt that God was going to send somebody by to say, hey, I'm going to look at this case. This man is innocent. And I held on to my belief. I held on to my imagination until the real hero came by. He had assured me that he was going to get me out, and I began to use my mind in the sense of being free, and thought about what I would do once I was out, and that's how I survived.
So Mr. Hinton, as I think you know, has a remarkable book about his experience called The Sun Does Shine, which I'll encourage everyone to buy and read, because it is absolutely true that the amount of time that he spent on death row, Alabama's not a state like some of these states where there are never executions. During the time he was on death row, 55 people were executed. That meant people would be walking by his cell. In the early years, they would execute people with the electric chair. So he'd be in his cell and he'd smell the flesh burning. He'd hear the sound. It was traumatizing. This was torture. And not everybody, and in fact, most people wouldn't be able to endure that, wouldn't be able to survive that. It's just easier to give up than to have hope in such a hopeless place. And what makes him so remarkable is that he found his hope, and that struggle to hold on to that was every bit as challenging as the legal struggle we had to persuade a court to grant him relief, which is why, I think he's someone who absolutely, should be celebrated and admired. But it is no small thing to survive an environment like that in the way that he did it.
There's one particular story that I'm captivated by. Because as someone that spent over a decade monitoring the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis and skinheads under Reverend C.T. Vivian at the Center for Democratic Renewal, one of the most unexpected stories from your time on death row is about Henry Hayes. And for our audience listeners who don't know this, Henry Hayes' father was a Ku Klux Klan, KKK Grand Wizard, who ordered him to lynch a 19-year-old black man. Can you just tell us a little bit about this unlikely friendship?
A black man had been found not guilty for killing a white police officer in Birmingham. And his father gave him and 2 other Klansmen the order to go out and kill the first African-American male they came across. and they just happened to come across Michael McDonald. And they executed him in their own way. And when Henry came to death row, he wouldn't talk, and I would talk to him and holler, and he never would speak anything. But eventually, I didn't let that stop me. I didn't know who he was really, because on death row you can't see nothing but man's wide and concrete. You don't know who next to you. But we began to talk, and I got a note saying, "Do you know who you're talking to every day?" And I hollered out, "No." Whoever sent me the note, and they said, "That's the clansman who killed that kid." And so I asked Henry a question. I said, "Henry, why you didn't tell me who you were?" And Henry didn't respond. But I had to ask myself a more important question: did it matter? And once I asked myself, did it matter? The answer was no. He still deserved compassion. He still deserved love like any other human being. And so I began to talk to him. And so Henry would call me Ray. We'd talk every day, and I would ask Henry a question like, Henry, do they teach you to hate in school? This is something your mom, dad talk to you? I wanted to know, I really did.
Mhm.
And he would tell me, and I thought about what my mother told me. She said, no matter what one does in life, they still deserve compassion. And she would always say, boy, you always making me mad, and I still love you. And you're always doing something that God don't like, and he still love you. So I want you to have the same compassion for someone else. And Henry fit that mold. And so I wanted to show Henry that although we was born different color, we still was brothers in Christ. And so I allowed Henry to say what he wanted. And I noticed over the course of the year, by just being who I was, I didn't try to talk down to him. I didn't try to tell him anything that he said was wrong. I wanted him to finally figure that out for himself. And over the course of 14 years, we became friends. And the reason I can say we became friends, I never will forget one day on the visiting yard, his father came to see him. And he begged for me to come to his table, and I got up, and you weren't supposed to get up. But I got up and went over to his table, and he said, Dan, I want you to meet my friend, Ray. And when he introduced me to his father as his friend, I knew then that something had changed in it, because he probably never had said a black person was his friend. And I put my hand out to shake his father's hand, but his father wouldn't shake my hand. I took my hand down and I went back to my table, and my visit asked me, he said, what was that all about? And I said, progress. And so when we left the visiting yard, I looked at him and I said, Henry, what's wrong? And he wouldn't say nothing. I said, Henry, what's wrong? He said nothing. I said, Henry, come on, man, tell me what's wrong. And he said, well, my father said, as long as he come to see me, I am never to invite a nigger to his table. And I said, Henry, that's your father cancer. If your father want to die with that cancer called hate, let him do it. But you don't have to. I said, Henry, for the first time in your life, you are where you can make your own decision. Who you talk to, how long you talk to them, who you want to be friends with, that's up to you now. Your father can't tell you that. Your mother can't tell you. And we got back to the cell, and he went in his cell, and we lived by each other, and we talked for the rest of the evening. And I said, Henry, I want you to know that God created you in his own image. He created you the way that he wanted you to be, and he created me who he wanted me to be. I said, Henry, I have never stole from you, never robbed you, never did anything. I want to know, why do you hate me? And Henry responded was, I don't even know you. And I said, Henry, that's my point exactly. You don't even know me to hate me. And from then on, we just became talking every day, became friends as best you could on death row. And his family died out over the course of 15 years. And he asked the warden, could I sit with him? And the warden granted his wish, and I sit with him a little bit during to the day of the execution. But what got me was his last words. And his last words was, all of my life, I was brought up to hate. The very people that I was brought up to hate for the last 15 years have shown me nothing but love. And tonight, as I leave this world now knowing what real love feel like. And they executed my friend Henry. And I am convinced that if America ever want to do away with hate, we got to first be willing to talk to each other and be willing to listen to each other. But I gets it. America are afraid to have that open and honest conversation like Henry and I did.
Wow. Mr. Hinton, your mother believed in your innocence and visited you every single month until the day she died in 2002. What's one thing your mother taught you that kept you going during your darkest moments?
You know, my mother was one of those that she knew her children. Somehow, my mother could put 12 cookies in a jar, and she would tell all us, don't touch it. But she come home and she count those cookies, and one was missing. She knew exactly this one of those children got that cookie. And that because I say today to young people, if parents is really paying attention, they know you better than you think they are. Mm-hmm. And my mom not one time asked me, did I do it? She looked at me and she said, I know you didn't do this. Mm-hmm. And that because of the way she brought me up. That's the way I grew up without a father, but I didn't grow up because he was absent. My father worked in a coal mine, and a rock fell on him and he lost his mind. And my father was in a mental institution the rest of since I was 4 years old. But I didn't fear no man more than I feared my mother. My mom just knew that one day I would come home, and my mom used to ask me every day she come, she would say, when are you coming home? And to be honest with you, I would have to lie to my mom. And I would say, Mama, they're working on it. And soon. And that soon never did get there before she passed away. And I have to live with that every day. But I know my mom passed knowing that her baby boy, I'm the baby of 10, 5 boys and 5 girls. And with every fiber in my being, I know my mom passed knowing that I was coming home, knowing that I was innocent. And so that carries me every day, and every day I leave home with the thought of making my mom proud. What can I do to make my mom even proud of me? And if that means falling down, getting up and saying, hey, I'm sorry for falling. Now I don't have a problem saying it. And I just want to say that I had the best mother in the world. And my mom taught me so much that to this day I'm still living off. And I believe with every fiber in my being, I'm living off my mother's prayer for me.
Wow, she sounds like just an incredible force for humanity. April 3rd, 2015, Good Friday, of course, for our listeners and our viewers. You walked out of Jefferson County Jail at 9:30 in the morning. You said that being released at the age of 58, if I'm not mistaken, was like walking out into another planet. Can you just help us understand that? And what was the hardest adjustment?
Well, I tell people it was good and bitter. The good was I was finally out. The bad part to me was my mother wasn't there to see her baby boy come home. But we did the interview, and Mr. Stevenson had told my best friend Lester to take me to his home. But I wanted to go and see where they had buried my mother. And the two of us got in his car, and I put on the seatbelt, and as we was going down the road, this white lady said, in 1/10 of a mile, turn right. And to be honest with you, I said, what the hell? And I was afraid to look back at, and I was pointing back in the back, telling him that a white lady was in the back seat. And he was laughing, and I can't understand what he's laughing about. And I'm saying, white lady back there. And when he couldn't take it no more, he pulled over. He said, there's no white lady back there. She in here. And I said, how the hell she get in there? And he went to telling me about GPSs and all of that. And she would tell him the quickest route, the fastest route to take. You know, realize I'm been locked up 30 years. And I don't know nothing about modern technology. I don't know anything about the changes of the world and what's going on. I'm taking each minute, 5 minutes, trying to adjust, trying to learn. And my focus was, to be honest with you, where do I live? Where do I get a job? Where do I get clothes? Because I was set, as they say, free, but I was set free with nothing. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a place to call home or anything. But through it all, I was able to live with my best friend. And as I said, Mr. Stevenson was there and have been there from the time I was released and before I got released. And I began to say, hey, I don't know how I'm going to make it if life is going to be this hard. It worked out, and I am so thankful to be where I am today. And I didn't give up. And again, I had hope that one day it would get better, and I can truly say that it has.
You said something that we all loved, and it was the fact that you go outside every night and look at the stars and the moon because you hadn't seen them for years. And you still, to this day, walk in the rain, having nearly 30 years stolen from you. You could be bitter and resentful, but you are just a bundle of love. You're a bundle of wisdom, of energy, of just gratitude. How do you have so much gratitude in your heart right now?
Well, you know, being locked up for 30 years, you don't realize, there's an old saying, you don't realize what you had until you lose it. And I had lost my freedom, and I would sit there and lay in the bed and look up and see nothing but concrete. And then I realized when I was free, I never did look up and see the stars or the moon, and how much I wish I had seen the stars and the moon, because God put one of the most beautiful pictures that Rembrandt, Picasso could never have painted. And I try to tell people, never take it for granted. Always look up, just see the beautiful stars gleaming and blitzing, watch the moon. And so when I came home, I made a promise to myself that every night I would go out and watch the stars and the moon and look up and thank God for putting that beautiful picture up there so I could see it. Never take anything for granted. Life is not promised. Tomorrow could be the last day. So enjoy the day, but enjoy it in a way that you enjoy it with somebody and make someone else feel just as good as you feel. And every day I try to come here at EJI, I hope that I can say something to someone and make them smile, because I believe that we need to smile more. We need to learn how to embrace one another, love one another, and treat each other with the most respect. And that's what I try to do every day of my life. I'm not worried about what happened. I'm trying to live for today, and hopefully, if I see fit, God see fit for me to live tomorrow, I want to put a smile on whoever face I come in contact with.
Well, you've certainly done that today.
Thank you.
And for all of our listeners, I wish for you, when you're outside again at night and you're looking at the stars and the moon, that you also remember that Anthony Hinton probably, if not at that moment, at some point that night, will be joining you in that moment of awe and gratefulness. Bryan, you spent your career in courtrooms winning legal battles, but then you decide to build the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. What was it that made you realize that the fight for justice had to expand beyond the courts?
Well, I think it was that realization that we were moving into an era where our courts were retreating from a full commitment to the rule of law. If you study Reconstruction, what happened after the Civil War, we created laws that should have created a different future for formerly enslaved people. The 14th Amendment guaranteed equal protection. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote. And during that 12-year period, 80% of the Black people eligible to vote registered and voted. We sent people to Congress. We opened Black colleges. It's when we built most of the Black churches that exist in this country. We made a commitment to family. There were thriving communities in Tulsa and places, Greenwood, and all these places around the country. And then our courts retreated from a commitment to the rule of law, and the U.S. Supreme Court decided to favor states' rights over constitutional rights. We gave in to the demands of racial hierarchy and white supremacy over the demands of equal protection and the right to vote. And that's what created that century of a challenge. And I sensed something like that happening again a decade ago when the court stopped responding to evidence of innocence, when we were losing cases of clear intentional racial bias in jury selection, when evidence of innocence was being ignored. It just became clear to me that we had to keep doing that legal work, but we were going to have to get outside the courtroom and begin doing this narrative work. And I do think that is the defining struggle for this era, that we are now in a narrative battle in this country and across the globe. There are people who are pushing the politics of fear and anger. They know that when people allow themselves to be governed by fear and anger, they'll start tolerating things you should never tolerate. They know that if you allow yourself to be governed by fear and anger, people will accept things that are unacceptable. When you look at human history, the worst moments in the 20th century is when countries gave in to the politics of fear and anger. That's what happened in Europe, in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. It's what happened in Rwanda in the early 1990s, where neighbors allowed themselves to be so swept up with fear and anger that they started slaughtering their other neighbors. And it will happen anywhere where we give into that. And so for me, it became necessary to kind of combat that in this narrative struggle. And at the heart of that struggle, in America at least, is our continuing challenge to overcome the legacy of racial inequality, racial injustice. It doesn't matter where you live, in the Northwest, the Southeast, Midwest, New England. If you live in America, you live in a space where there's a long history of racial inequality. And I believe that history has created toxins, pollution in the air that we all breathe in, and it keeps us from being fully healthy. And it's largely in the air because we haven't committed to talking about, to challenging that narrative in the way that we need to. And I think that's what we must do in this moment. I don't blame past generations. When you're enslaved, you have to focus on freedom. When you're being terrorized by lynching violence, you have to focus on security. In Montgomery, the 1950s, when you're disenfranchised and excluded, you have to focus on civil rights. But in 2025, we now have the capacity, we have the opportunity, and I believe we have the obligation to confront this narrative, to change this history, to commit to a period of truth and justice, truth and repair, truth and redemption, truth and restoration. That's what we haven't done. In South Africa, after the collapse of apartheid, they committed to a process where the victims of apartheid could give voice to their harm, where the perpetrators could give voice to their regret. You go to Berlin, you see a city that's reckoned with the history of the Holocaust. There, every 200 meters, there's a monument, a memorial, a stone that the national memorial, the memorial to victims of the Holocaust is in the center of the city. There are no Adolf Hitler statues in Berlin. There are no monuments or memorials to the perpetrators of the Holocaust. And when I looked at the landscape of Montgomery, this is a city that has 59 markers and monuments to the Confederacy. And when I moved here in the 1980s, you couldn't find the words slave, slavery, enslavement anywhere in the public landscape. Our three largest high schools were named after Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Sidney Lanier, all Confederate leaders. And we didn't acknowledge the history of the Civil Rights era. And so we felt like that had to change. So we've done a lot of scholarship, and then we felt like we needed to create cultural institutions that help people reckon with the truth. I think the thing about truth and justice, truth and repair, truth and redemption, those things are sequential. You got to have the truth part before you can get to the beautiful R words. And when you skip the truth and you just try to do repair and remedy, it doesn't work. So we believe we have to create these truth-telling spaces. When I came back from South Africa and Berlin, I couldn't think of cultural institutions that were talking honestly about the legacy of slavery or lynching. And that was the reason why we created these spaces. And I'm excited, I'm energized because people are coming and we're getting amazing feedback. And this truth-telling, I believe, is what our generation must commit to create the world that we want to create. I tell people the purpose of our museum and our memorial and our new sculpture park The purpose is to create a world where the children of our children are not going to be presumed dangerous or guilty because of their color. I want to create a world where no one can go through what Mr. Hinton had to go through. We have to create a world where all kinds of people are liberated from the bigotry that comes when we accept these narratives of racial inequality. And it's both black and white people. The white kids who were taught that they're better than everybody else because they're white, they were basically taught that they could only love a certain kind of person. They couldn't love anybody and everybody. They could only have a certain kind of narrow existence. And I think that's cruel. We want to break that down. But to do that, I do think we have to go through this truth telling process. People say it's hard, it's challenging, it's uncomfortable. And I get it. But we can't make the truth comfortable just so people will embrace. We've got to make it what it is. And the reality is that it's those uncomfortable truths that inspire us to do the great things. It was never comfortable to be off the buses for 381 days. It was not comfortable to walk from Selma to Montgomery. Nothing about justice and change and progress in this country that's been meaningful has ever been comfortable, convenient, or easy. And so that's what we want people to embrace if they're going to be part of this struggle. And so, yeah, I'm really proud that we now have a landscape that I hope can really advance this era of truth and justice that I believe our nation desperately needs.
It's not about collective guilt. It's about collective responsibility.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that we don't talk about slavery and lynching and segregation because we want to punish America. We talk about these things because we want to liberate America. I believe something better is waiting for us. I think that there's something that feels more like freedom, more like justice, more like equality and community, and it's waiting for us. But we can't get there if we don't have the courage to turn back and deal with these burdens that are holding us back, this history that is holding us back.
Anthony, I just want to transition to you for a moment. Your story, of course, is at the Legacy Museum, and now we all know that you're this remarkable community educator traveling the country to speak about your experiences and, of course, to also advocate against the death penalty. So thank you for that. When you stand in front of audiences, especially young audiences, and share what happened to you, what's the one thing you want them to especially remember?
I want them to remember what I went through, and I want them to realize that they have the power to change it where no one else could go through what I went through. And I try my best to encourage them to get out and vote. If they're not a registered voter, get out and vote and learn to run for office. And I think if we can get young people motivated to pick up politics and be in it for the right reason, then I believe that hope that I have, Mr. Stevenson have, you have, our young people is yearning to do things great. And I'm one of those who encourage those young people to don't sit back, don't just talk, get out and do. And every time I leave a university or somewhere where I had the privilege to talk to young people, I love 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, I get an email or a letter saying, Mr. Hinton, I listened to you. I decided that I'm going to law school and become a lawyer and fight. This is what makes me get up every morning and be hopeful that our young people is yearning to be great. And I hope that I can just nudge them a little bit to be that great.
Wow. Amazing. Bryan, in your TED Talk that has been viewed over 9 million times, you said each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. After representing over 140 people on death row, what have they taught you about what's possible when we see people's full humanity?
Yeah. Well, it's been the great joy of my life. It's been a real privilege. People don't think, the choice I made was a particularly smart one because we don't, you don't make a lot of money and all of that. But I feel like I've been so privileged to stand next to people who have been condemned, who've been marginalized, who are disfavored, who are hated. Because what I've learned is that when you stand next to someone who's hated and disfavored and condemned, you can sometimes harness the power of grace, the power of mercy, and really do something beautiful. And I now believe more than I've ever believed that we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done. I think if someone tells a lie, they're not just a liar. I think if someone takes something, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill someone, you're not just a killer. And we're required to know the other things you are before we judge you. And when you have that orientation, the most beautiful thing that comes from that is that you're able to avoid hate. You're able to avoid the trap of hating someone because they hate you. The burden that comes with filling your heart with all of this violence and bigotry. That's the power for me of doing the work that I get to do. And then, you get to meet someone like an Anthony Ray Hinton, someone whose remarkable heart and character and spirit is as glorious, as reflective of God's power and grace and mercy as any place you could go. You could go to all kinds of places in the world. You could go around people with a lot of money, a lot of resources, people who have this or that, and you might not find anything precious and rare and beautiful like the soul of this man. And so I feel really, really privileged. And we one of these cases banning mandatory life sentences for children. And the great privilege I have every day now at EJI is that a lot of those folks who were told they were going to die in prison when they were children are now out and they're working here. So I can walk down the hall and see somebody who was supposed to die in prison in the office doing intakes. I can get on the shuttle buses where a couple of my clients who were told they were going to die in prison are now driving the shuttle bus. We got people working in the museum who were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. I tell people I haven't made a lot of money, but I've made more than money could ever buy in being able to see what justice can create in the lives of people who've been treated unjustly.
Beautiful.
Well, Bryan, Anthony, thank you on our collective behalf, and thank you on behalf of humanity for this incredibly powerful conversation. We are inspired by your love, your conviction, your passion, your energy. What began as a letter from a death row inmate became a 16-year fight for justice. What started obviously just as a regular lawyer-client relationship has become a bond of friendship, love, and admiration, and just true partnership between the two of you. We've also been educated on the fact that the rate of error for death row inmates is 1 in 8. The quote that those without capital often get the punishments. But you've also inspired us to look at the stars and the moon every evening, to go walk and dance in the rain and never take for granted those things that we have the ability to enjoy in life. Thank you for showing us what's possible when somebody refuses to accept injustice. And both of you, thank you for being shining examples of people who refuse to live in despair, but instead live with the hope. A lot of gratitude to you both.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for joining us. New episodes drop every Tuesday, with bonus content every Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment.